I never thought picking up my purse would end up breaking my heart in half. Tyler's little hand reached out from beneath the head table, sticky with frosting and tight with fear. "Grandma," he whispered, tugging gently. "Can we leave now?" My knees were already bent, my fingers brushing the strap of my bag when I looked up, and that's when I saw her, Brianna, my daughter-in-law, in her ivory column dress and that cruel little smile she wore like a brooch. She stared straight at me and shook her head, slow and firm, like she was calling off a dog. Cold swept through my bones like someone cracked open a window in winter. Magnolia Hall's lighting suddenly seemed too bright, its chandeliers too smug, the air too thick with perfume and pretend. The guests around us kept clinking glasses, eating their lamb chops, passing around compliments like scripted lines. No one else seemed to notice a thing, but I did. I sat back in my chair, Tyler now squirming into my lap, his tiny voice damp against my neck. "I found it under the table," he said, and slipped a folded paper into my hand. The outside was wrapped in one of his crayon drawings, me in a red dress, a big table circled in red beneath us like a hiding place. Inside, an email printed from someone's inbox. Subject line, "Grandparent Access Intervention." There was more, but I couldn't read it right there, not in the middle of the ballroom. Not while my son Troy kissed his bride again, and I realized this was his second wedding, and I hadn't even known they'd already married days ago. The head table had a cake knife where my name should have been. I held the paper low and looked around. Everyone else was busy pretending. Brianna's gaze never left mine. That shake of her head wasn't just a denial. It was a warning. Tyler's breathing quickened in time with mine. I squeezed him to my side, heartbeat tight in my throat. At exactly 6:17 p.m. on October 19th, 2025, in Magnolia Hall on 3rd Avenue South, I understood two things. I was not supposed to be here, and someone wanted to make sure I knew it. I pressed Tyler's curls to my shoulder, rose from the table, and whispered that we were going to get some air. "Just air," I said. But my purse was already on my arm, and my hand gripped that crayon-wrapped paper like it was a ticking bomb. We were halfway to the glass doors when Brianna glided up, not touching me, but close enough that I could smell the peonies in her hair. "You always make things about yourself, Dolores," she murmured, low and sweet like spoiled syrup. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Can you please not ruin this for him? Just for once?" I didn't answer her. I stepped past. By 9:42 that night, Tyler was in his Spider-Man pajamas in my guest room, and I sat in the kitchen of my College Hills home, the email unfolded on the laminate table I'd had since 1994, fluorescent overhead light buzzing like a gnat. The document wasn't long, but every line shook me. It accused me of unpredictable emotional behavior and, quote, creating undue anxiety in the child's routines. It was typed on digital letterhead from a therapist named Dr. Sierra L. Jennings, Ph.D., someone I had never heard of, a name that meant nothing to me. I held it up to the light, wondering if it was even real. The font looked generic, no contact number. There it was, though, in print. My name, Dolores Jean Morris, marked as a potential disruption. They were documenting me, framing me. I picked up my planner, Tyler's drawings still poking out like petals, and flipped to the back where I kept my scratch notes. There, I scribbled the name of the one person who might help me tell this story before it got told for me, Pastor Helen Carter. I sat still after that. The only sound was Tyler humming to himself through the vent in the floor. I wanted to cry. But I didn't. I wouldn't. Not in my own house. Instead, I poured myself a small cup of lemon tea. I sat in my chair at the end of the table, and I waited for the numbness to pass. A week earlier, my life had still felt like mine. It was a Tuesday, warm for October, with the kind of air that made my knees ache but didn't quite force me inside. I was in my back garden, clipping basil and cutting back the marigolds, waiting for 2:35 p.m., the time I left to get Tyler from school. That small rhythm, that quiet privilege, had become the spine of my week. Tuesdays and Thursdays were mine and Tyler's. I picked him up from Booker T. Elementary, his little legs pumping toward me the moment he spotted my maroon Corolla. He'd hurl his backpack at my knees and climb in grinning, breathless, with something he had to tell me. About a dinosaur, a spelling test, a kid named Zeke. Then we'd stop at Jones and Perry for a mango slushie or a box of cheese crackers. Something silly, always under $10. I kept a blanket in the back seat just for our mini picnics. Sometimes we sat at Bessie Estelle Park, other days in the backyard under my crepe myrtle. I'd braid his hair while he watched cartoons. Tell him the same story about when his father, Troy, got stuck in a tire swing at age 7. At night, I'd sing a slow version of Wade in the Water while rubbing lavender oil on his temples. He used to call it Grandma's Magic. He believed it kept nightmares away. Every visit, Tyler added something to my planner. Little drawings of houses and dogs and suns with sunglasses, always labeled the same, Grandma Day. I flipped through it now, the week after the wedding, tracing the jagged lines of his crayon joy. My thumb caught on the receipt I'd used as a bookmark. Grocery, last Thursday, $64.20. Apples, kid yogurt, his favorite alphabet cereal. I still remembered the way he smiled when he saw I'd found the brand with the tiger on it again. The garden outside rustled in the breeze. My hands still smelled faintly of rosemary and the coconut oil I'd used to grease his scalp. I remembered how Brianna had once walked in, saw me buttoning Tyler's coat, and said, "You act like you're his nanny." When I looked up, confused, she added with a tight smile, "I mean, you're just the sitter, right? Not family?" That was the first time I ever wanted to ask her to leave. The first time I met Brianna, I set my table with the good china. Not the real kind. Lord knows I never had that. But the glazed porcelain set I'd picked out in 1987 with my late husband, Otis. Ivory with the pale blue rim. That night, I polished every fork, warmed the sweet rolls in the oven, and basted the turkey like my mother taught me, with rosemary, butter, and one quiet prayer. It was Thanksgiving, November 2022, and I wanted her to feel welcome. Troy had brought her down from Atlanta. She was poised, eyes always scanning like she was measuring the room with invisible tools. I gave her my warmest smile, pulled out her chair myself, and when the time came to carve the turkey, I walked to the hutch and opened the velvet-lined box that hadn't seen daylight since Mama passed. My mother's carving set, real silver, passed down from her mother. I held it out to Brianna like it meant something, which it did. "Would you like to carve the first slice?" I offered. "You're part of the family now." She blinked once, then smiled, like someone posing for a photo. "Oh, fancy," she said, taking the knife as though it were a museum piece. The moment passed, shallow but smooth. She carved a single sliver, then handed it off and moved on to her phone, texting under the tablecloth as my yams browned. Later, after everyone was full and the dishes were stacked, I overheard her talking to Troy while they rinsed plates. "Does your mom always make such heavy food?" she asked, laughing, not bothering to whisper. "It's like eating the 1960s. I didn't say anything. I was in the living room folding the napkins, but I heard it. That night, I took the carving set back to its box, careful to clean the handle where her hand had been. I tucked it into the cabinet behind my sewing kit, away from the holiday things. There's a photograph from that day. Brianna in my apron, holding the knife and grinning with a slanted, toothless smirk. I found it last month while clearing the dining room shelf. The date in the corner reads November 24th, 2022. I remember because I'd spent $120 on that meal. Ham, turkey, sweet potatoes, collard greens, 2 pies, and a bottle of red for her, because she couldn't do sweet wines. It should have been a warm memory, but all it gave me was the slow, sinking feeling of having misread a room. 2 days after the wedding, I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen, my checkbook, and a notebook I'd bought from the Dollar General, with a marbled cover and a plastic spiral already fraying. I'd pulled out my file box from the hall closet, the one labeled Family in faded marker, and started the slow work of accounting for every dollar I'd poured into that household. The numbers weren't guesses. I had receipts. I kept them not out of suspicion, but out of habit. My generation learned early to document every cent, especially if it came from a widow's pension and not a man's salary. I'd made transfers through my Regions account on the 15th of every month, $675 for daycare, $950 for rent during that hard season in 2023 when Troy got laid off, $210 here, $180 there, groceries, utilities, Tyler's after-school coding club. I flipped pages, tabbed months. I totaled and retallied. The numbers whispered things I hadn't been willing to say aloud. $27,885 over 3 years. I stared at the figure like it had been etched in stone. That wasn't generosity. That was structural support. Rent for an apartment that never had my name on it, groceries for a fridge I never opened, tuition help for a class one wasn't told about until they needed a cosigner. Brianna used to say, "We never asked you to." Anytime money came up, it was her favorite kind of denial, the kind that made me feel foolish for offering. But she never sent a payment back. Not once. When the Venmo request came in, always from Troy's account, never hers, it would say something harmless, school thing, or "we're short this week." They knew I'd cover it. I used to tell myself it was for Tyler, that even if his parents didn't see me, he did. But now, with the email still sitting in the drawer, accusing me of being unpredictable, I saw it clearer. They'd accepted my money like one accepts the utility bill, expected, invisible, faceless. The shame didn't hit all at once. It trickled in, slow and acidic. I'd held my tongue to keep the peace, but peace never came. Just silence. And now, erasure. My calculator blinked its red digits at me, as if it too was appalled. I reached into my purse and pulled out the last deposit receipt from Regions. Teller, Andre Watkins. I circled his name. He'd seen it all pass through his window, transaction after transaction. I wondered, when I returned, if he'd remember me. The first shift came quietly, like most small betrayals do. It was April, soft rain falling across my windshield as I pulled into Tyler's preschool lot. I'd timed it perfectly, 2:57 p.m., my usual rhythm. But when I reached the gate, Ms. Asia Ford stepped outside, lips pressed tight. "Oh, Ems, Morris," she said, half surprised, half concerned. "Didn't you get the call? You're not listed for pickup anymore." My stomach dropped. "I'm not." "What?" She glanced behind her, like someone might be watching. Brianna said there were new instructions. Only parents going forward. No emergencies or alternates. I stood there, umbrella in hand, trying to understand how I'd gone from daily presence to persona non grata. Tyler hadn't mentioned anything. Troy hadn't said a word. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts, except one, time-stamped 2:08 p.m. from Tyler's iPad. "Where are you, Grandma?" The Uber I'd taken there was still idling at the curb. I'd spent $21.50 to show up for someone who apparently no longer needed me, or rather, was being told not to. I remember standing beneath the covered walkway, pretending to look at my weather app so I wouldn't start crying. Miss Ford looked torn, like she wanted to say more, but wasn't sure what would cost her. I didn't push. She had her job to protect, and I was starting to understand just how carefully Brianna curated impressions. I went home and sat in the car longer than I needed to, the seatbelt pressing against my rib cage like a strap holding me together. For 2 years, I'd pick Tyler up twice a week. It had been more than a favor. It had been hours. Snack time songs, sidewalk chalk, learning to tie his shoes on my porch steps. Now it was gone. With no warning, no explanation. Just erased. The next day, I left a banana on his front porch inside a paper lunch bag with a note. "Grandma's always on your side." I didn't knock. I just placed it gently beside the mat and walked away before anyone could accuse me of making a scene. I didn't know what story Brianna was telling by then. I only knew I was no longer part of it. But Miss Ford's face stayed with me, uneasy, conflicted, almost apologetic. That told me more than any policy change could. And Tyler's text, still glowing on my screen. "Where are you, Grandma?" It was Mother's Day weekend when the second cut came, deeper, more official. Mount Bethel AME's foyer was fragrant with lilies and powdered perfume, a soft bustle of women in pastel suits and children tugging at lace gloves. I'd just stepped inside, holding Tyler's hand, when he froze and pulled away. "There she is!" Brianna's voice rang out from across the vestibule. She strode toward us in a blush-colored dress and a smile with no welcome behind it. "Dolores, can I talk to you a sec?" She led me aside, past the bulletin board with choir notices and bake sale flyers, to the wooden bench near the coat racks. I could already tell it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a decision dressed as courtesy. "We made a few updates," she said, sliding her phone from her clutch. Her manicured nail hovered over the screen, ready to display her proof. "Streamlining emergency contacts and all." Just wanted to give you a heads up." She tapped, and there it was. A screenshot of the preschool's digital form, authorized contacts. My name, once third, right under Troy, was blacked out, literally. They'd redacted me with a fat digital marker. Tyler, still within earshot, looked up. "Grandma's not on the list?" Brianna laughed lightly, but her eyes stayed on mine. "We're simplifying, baby. Less confusion." Less confusion. As though my presence was chaos. As though 3 years of carpooling, doctor visits, emergency asthma pickups, and Thursday night lullabies amounted to clutter. I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because I knew anything more would be used as evidence. I felt the burn behind my eyes, but forced the tears down. Inside, Pastor Helen was already stepping up to the pulpit. Her voice floated out, warm and anchored. "Let us remember the mothers who've stood in the gap, even when unthanked." Tyler tugged on my sleeve. "Can I still sit with you?" I smiled. "Of course, baby." We walked in together, hand in hand, past rows of people who didn't know that I was being erased in real time. I took my usual spot, second pew from the front, pretending everything was normal. Later, Pastor Helen pulled me aside gently. She'd noticed the shift. "Their tone toward you has changed," she said softly, eyes kind but firm. "Let me know if you need me to bear witness." I nodded again. This time, not to disappear, but to mark the moment. August heat clung to everything, even inside the library's air-conditioned quiet. I sat at a corner terminal in the computer lab, the plastic seat creaking under me, a page of Tyler's doodles peeking from my planner. I wasn't there for books. I was there for answers. Earlier that week, my neighbor Ms. Loretta had mentioned a blog post Brianna shared in some parenting forum. "She didn't name you," Loretta said cautiously, "but it sure sounded like you." I didn't want to believe it, but something made me check. It didn't take long to find. Boundaries and Ghosts. How to Raise Your Child When the Past Lingers. The screen glared back at me as I read the opening line. There's a kind of presence that clings, hovering, hoarding, always offering help but never respecting space. She'd written about me. Without my name, yes, but with details only insiders would recognize. Mentions of unsolicited snacks, repetitive childhood songs, and a woman so fragile in her loneliness she smothers a child with secondhand affection. My hands shook as I scrolled. It wasn't just storytelling. It was framing, shaping a narrative where I was needy, intrusive, a burden. "She means me," I murmured aloud, not even realizing I'd spoken. Kim Tran, the librarian, looked up from a nearby desk. She was young, always helpful, always discreet. "Everything okay, Ms. Morris?" I swallowed. "Could you help me save this page? To a USB or something? Just in case." She came over without asking questions, clicking through the steps with a kind of reverent efficiency. "Do you want just this one?" she asked. I hesitated. "Can we get all the posts under her name?" She glanced at the author tag. "Got it." Within minutes, she handed me a flash drive, labeled it Dolores Library Backup. "Want to print a copy too?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I need to let it sit." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the little silver drive like it was a key to something I didn't want to open. But I knew what it meant. Brianna had taken it outside the family, made her version public. I opened my notebook and added a line under the evidence column. Blog post. Boundaries and Ghosts. Saved the 3rd of August 25. Confirmed targeting. The page didn't look dramatic, just a scribble in blue ink. But I could feel it shifting something inside me. Not rage. Not even sorrow. Just a firm, low thrum of clarity. By September, I'd stopped calling. Not out of anger. At least not the kind that burns fast and loud. But out of something colder. Something like surrender. I told myself I was giving them space. That maybe, if I stepped back completely, the story they were writing about me would dissolve on its own. I deleted the contact shortcut to Troy's phone. Erased the recurring reminder to send Tyler's lunch treats every other Thursday. Let voicemail pick up when his birthday rolled around and I wasn't sure if I was allowed to sing to him anymore. Days blurred into each other inside my quiet house. I dusted less. Let the radio hum low in the background like it was talking to someone else. The living room felt heavy with absence. One afternoon, I came across the baby gift I'd picked up weeks earlier. Blue wrapping still crisp. Receipt tucked under the ribbon. A soft cotton onesie, size 6 to 9 months, with tiny bees embroidered across the chest. I'd written a check to tuck inside the card. $200. To help with the new nursery. Love, Grandma. I sat with it on my lap in the den, light slanting through the curtains. The card remained unsigned. The envelope unsealed. I tore the check in half, then again, and again. The soft rip of the paper was the only sound in the room. Later that evening, I scrolled through Instagram. I hadn't unfollowed anyone. Part of me still hoped for glimpses. I found one. Brianna, radiant and polished, posted a new photo, her standing beside Tyler, who looked thinner somehow, smaller. They were in the backyard I used to mow. Her caption read, "Cutting ties brings peace. Dizzy." Tyler was blurred in the background. My name wasn't mentioned, but I knew. Everyone who'd seen the other post would know. That night, I didn't cry. Not the sobbing kind, at least. But something inside me closed like a book gently shutting. I walked down the hallway, opened the closet, and placed the unopened gift in the bottom drawer. Not trash, just away. There was no email, no call. Just that post, her smile, and Tyler's face fading behind filters. 3 days after the wedding, I sat on my porch swing, the dusk warm and wet like a breath. Cicadas whined from the trees, and the mailbox clicked as I dropped the letter in it. A pale envelope addressed to Attorney Monique Sanders, Esquire. I'd written the name slowly, like I was carving it into something firm. In my lap sat Tyler's drawing, the one he handed me under the wedding table, folded around a scrap of real danger. On the page, he'd drawn 2 figures, me and him, sitting under a round table circled in red crayon. Brianna and Troy stood above, mouths scribbled open like shouting Jacko. Lanterns. It wasn't just a drawing. It was evidence. Wrapped around the email she thought she'd thrown away. Subject: Petition to limit Dolores's custodial presence. The language was stiff, clinical. Documenting patterns of boundary disruption, emotional volatility potentially harmful to Tyler's developmental environment, request for review of informal caregiving roles. And there, at the bottom, was her name. Not just Brianna's, but Troy's too. Co-signed. My son's signature. As though I were a problem to be managed. I read the email 3 times. Then I read it again. There had been no court filing. Not yet. But the tone was clear. It was prelude. They were testing language, laying foundation, planning to make my role optional, then inappropriate, then impossible. I looked down at Tyler's crayon version of me. His tiny note in the corner said, "Gma under the table is funny." He didn't know he'd saved me. Inside, I pulled out my landline and dialed the number from the yellow business card I kept in my Bible. Monique picked up on the 3rd ring. "Ms. Morris?" "It's time," I said simply. She didn't ask what I meant, just told me what to send, when to come in, what not to post. As I hung up, the porch light flickered above me. I sat back on the swing and listened to the creak of the chain, the hush of night. I had no appetite, no TV running, no distractions. But I had clarity. And I had the document they'd hoped would stay buried, under the catered tables and chiffon runners. I wasn't erased. Not yet. The next morning, I walked into the Regions Bank branch on 20th Street at exactly 10:44 a.m. The lobby smelled of fresh carpet glue and lemon cleaner, and the ceiling fan made a lazy circle over the teller desks. I carried a small folder in my handbag, my hands dry and shaking just a little, though my face didn't show it. Andre Watkins spotted me from his window and gave a small nod. No smile. That was one of the reasons I liked him. He didn't do false cheer. "Ms. Morris," he said, motioning me forward. "You all right today?" I placed the folder on the counter. "I need to freeze and revoke all transfers to Troy Morris. Any linked cards, any scheduled deposits to the family account ending in 8,219, and I want to remove all joint access privileges. Permanently." Andre didn't blink. He just pulled up my file and started typing. "You brought identification?" I slid my license and social security card across. "Everything should be under my name only, going forward." While he typed, I looked around the lobby. A man in a work uniform filled out a deposit slip. An older woman counted quarters into a paper roll. Life going on, like the world wasn't shifting beneath my feet. I'll also need confirmation of cancellation on all automatic payments tied to their household. My voice was calm, the kind of calm you earn. not inherit. Andre passed me a document. Transaction slip. You'll want to keep that. You're officially clear of all external transfers. He slid a receipt under my hand. Number 874,532, printed at the top in black ink. The weight of it in my purse felt like a new key. As he processed the final cancellation, his hand paused slightly on the keyboard. You need to report anything unusual? He asked, eyes still on the screen. Not yet, I said, but I'm documenting everything. He gave a subtle nod. No need for explanation. No pity in his expression, just quiet acknowledgement. As I turned to leave, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Brianna. Brianna, card issues? We're short this week. Can you check your end? I stared at the screen. Let the silence between us do the talking. Then I slipped the phone back into my bag beside the receipt and walked out into the bright Alabama sun, steps steady on the concrete. They would feel it now. The absence of assumption. That evening, the dining table transformed into a war room. I cleared it of candles, coasters, the small bowl of peppermints, one kept for Tyler, and laid down my weapons. Receipts, screenshots, printed emails, bank statements, planner pages. Even the USB Kim Tran had labeled Dolores, Grandparent Defense. Each item had its own quiet weight, a kind of testimony, not just of what had been taken, but of how much I'd given before they ever asked. The lamp overhead buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow onto my folders. I began sorting by year. Color-coded tabs. Sticky notes marking the bigger entries. $1,800 for Troy's dental work in 2022. $1,100 for Brianna's night classes that never led to a degree. $465 in children's books and tutoring apps. $5,000 toward their relocation expenses when they claimed Birmingham was too small-minded. Over 5 years, $39,762. I hadn't known it totaled that much. I stared at the figure and felt no regret, only a strange kind of mourning. The kind you feel when you finally count the hours someone never thanked you for. Then came the screenshots. The blog post from August. Instagram captions. The blurred photo of Tyler from September 1st, labeled, Cutting Ties Brings Peace. My notes on the tone Brianna used at the church. The fact that Troy hadn't reached out once since the wedding. Finally, the email from Miss Ford. I'd reached out that afternoon, unsure she'd even respond, but her reply was waiting in my inbox. Warm, professional, and printed on school letterhead. A clear, precise statement of fact. Ms. Dolores Morris has been a reliable and consistent presence in Tyler's life. Her absence has been noted and has caused emotional impact. I slid it into a plastic sheet protector. The first outside voice, confirming what I'd lived. The USB drive held it all digitally, labeled folders, dated backups, one entire section titled Roles/Access Revoked. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and looked at the evidence laid out like puzzle pieces, finally forming a picture. Not perfect, not clean, but true. October 24th. The leaves had just started turning gold along 7th Avenue as I made my way up the church steps. Mount Bethel AME stood steady and broad before me, just like it had through every storm of my life. Marriage, widowhood, single motherhood, and now this. Pastor Helen met me in the conference room, arms open and face soft, with that rare blend of grace and grit only some women carry. Miss Ford arrived 5 minutes later, still in her work blazer, eyes alert behind her glasses. And Monique Sanders, tall and precise in a slate gray suit, brought a leather portfolio and a quiet assurance that settled the air like iron. I'd invited them all with care. Not friends who would comfort me, but women who would stand beside me in clarity. Monique opened her folder. I've reviewed your documentation. It's thorough. The blog post alone implies character defamation, and the unofficial guardianship petition could easily support a cease and desist. She passed around copies of the email Brianna had co-signed with Troy. Ms. Ford adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. I'd like to formally confirm, she said, that Dolores was present at preschool drop-off and pickup for over 2 years. She was on our contact list. She brought snacks. She knew the routine. Tyler responded to her with visible comfort. His teachers noted it in their logs. Pastor Helen nodded slowly. Then we're not just dealing with exclusion. We're looking at an active smear. She turned to me. What do you want us to do, Dolores? The question caught me, because no one had asked me that in months. Not what I needed. Not what I wanted. "I want my name cleared," I said, voice steady. "And I want it documented. I'm not trying to drag anyone, but I will not disappear quietly." Monique placed the draft letter on the table. Cease and desist. It includes language regarding reputational harm, unauthorized claims, and financial exploitation. I'll notarize it myself. I looked around the table. 3 women, smart, rooted, resolute, bearing witness. Pastor Helen reached over and placed her hand on mine. "You're not alone, Dolores. That matters." And it did. For the first time in a long while, it truly did. October 25th was a Friday. Still warm, though the light had changed. That low golden kind that makes everything look more honest. I pulled up to Monique's office just past 11 a.m., envelope in hand. Inside, the notarized boundary letter, 3 pages long, firm but calm. No threats, just facts, expectations, and consequences. The letter stated clearly that I would no longer tolerate misrepresentation, interference with my relationship to Tyler, or any unauthorized use of my resources. Brianna and Troy's names were printed in bold. Their copy would arrive via email and certified mail. I dropped it in Monique's secure Dropbox myself. The weight of it in my hand didn't lift when I let it go, but something in my spine straightened as I walked back to the car. By the time I got home, I had the read receipt in my inbox. Opened. 11:17 a.m. Subject, Notice of Boundaries and Legal Intent. Dolores Morris Brianna responded 30 minutes later via email. I read it once. Then again. Good. We need distance. Hopefully now you'll finally let go. No denial. No apology. No mention of Tyler. That was what told me she knew exactly what she was doing. At the kitchen table, I flipped open the folder containing my will. The old version still had Troy listed as executor, Brianna named in a contingency clause. That document belonged to a version of me who still believed proximity meant loyalty. I took out the pen. The new version, already reviewed by Monique, struck their names clean. Beneficiaries updated. Executor changed to my sister Cynthia. Trust established for Tyler alone, with Pastor Helen as guardian of the fund until he turned 25. I initialed each page, signed the last, and slipped it into the fireproof box under my bed. Outside, kids rode bikes past my window. One of them called out Tyler's name, though he wasn't there. My house felt quieter than usual, but it wasn't empty. It was mine again. That afternoon, I called the probate office and confirmed the new filing. The clerk on the line didn't ask questions, just took the reference number and logged the change. I wrote one final note in my binder. Boundary letter delivered, will updated, position secured. Then I closed the folder and watched the sun slide down the kitchen tile. 2 days later, I sat on the 3rd pew in the fellowship hall, hands folded in my lap, watching Tyler's church choir line up near the podium. They wore little white sashes and stood in nervous rows, voices chirping softly through their warm-ups. Tyler waved when he spotted me. I gave him a smile and a wink. But before the music even started, the back doors slammed open. Brianna stormed in, heels clapping against the tile like punctuation. Her dress was all ruffles and speed, lipstick smeared slightly at one corner. She didn't look at anyone else, just me. "You have manipulated my child," she shouted, voice echoing off the church walls. Parents gasped. A few clutched their programs tighter. The choir director paused, mouth half open, trying to decide whether to call security or Jesus. "You think this is noble?" she snapped, pointing directly at me. "Showing up here with your little fake innocence and Sunday smile, acting like you haven't poisoned him against us?" Tyler looked frozen, eyes darting between us. Pastor Helen stepped forward from her seat near the altar. "Brianna," she said calmly, "this is not the time or place." "Oh, now we care about timing?" Brianna laughed bitterly. "Ask her what she's been saying behind our backs. Ask her how she's twisting things so our son doesn't even ask for us anymore." I didn't rise. I didn't speak. I just reached into my purse and held up my phone, not to record, but to show the screen. Recording. All N. Deacon Harold, seated 2 rows behind, was already filming. His lens didn't shake. He was known for catching details. Pastor Helen stepped between us, voice now firm. You're causing a disturbance in the house of God. I'm asking you, one time only, to leave." "I am his mother," Brianna cried, a tear finally sliding down her cheek, mascara tracing the edge of her fury. "And this is his sanctuary," Pastor Helen replied. "You don't get to tear it down because your story is unraveling." Brianna's face crumpled, not with remorse, but the raw, wounded pride of someone who expected the crowd to choose her. They didn't. She turned sharply, heels skidding slightly, and stormed out the way she came in. Tyler looked at me, lip trembling. I nodded once, slow and calm. "You're okay," I mouthed. And somehow, despite everything, he nodded back. By the time Wednesday came, the letter had been mailed, the will filed, and the video had already passed through half the church. But I wasn't interested in gossip. I was interested in truth. That evening, October 29th, 6 p.m., I stood in Room B of Mount Bethel AME with a pitcher of water, a stack of printed materials, and a heart that beat like it was both afraid and alive. The invitation was clear. If you have questions, come. If you've heard whispers, come. If you care about what's true, come. Monique arrived first, binder in hand. Miss Ford came straight from school, still smelling of printer ink and disinfectant. Pastor Helen took her usual seat at the front, not to speak, just to preside. Cynthia was there too, standing quietly behind me like she always did when I was forced to be braver than I wanted to be. The room held 22 people in all, deacons, committee chairs, a few mothers from the children's ministry, even Sister May Vaughn, who hadn't missed a quarterly meeting since 1983. Troy didn't show. His name tag sat folded on the back table like a question mark no one picked up. I opened with no ceremony, no pleasantries. "I've been painted a certain way," I said, voice even, "by people who think silence equals guilt. Tonight, I'm setting the record straight." I passed out copies of the timeline. 5 years, itemized support, removed access, blog entries, the notarized cease and desist, the letter from Ms. Ford. Each document was numbered, indexed, and clipped. Then I laid the binder on the table. Not all of it, just enough. Monique opened to the petition, the one Tyler found under the wedding table. She read it aloud, slow and clear. Gasps moved through the room like wind rustling hymnal pages. Ms. Ford stood next. "I taught that boy for 3 years," she said. "Dolores wasn't a bystander. She was his compass." No one interrupted. Then I took a breath and said the hardest truth out loud. "I'm not trying to punish anyone," I said. "I'm trying to exist, to stay in the life of the child I love, without being made into a ghost." At 7:02 p.m., just as the church bells rang once outside for the hour, the board came to their conclusion. Sister May Vaughn, chairwoman of the Children's Ministries Board, and as precise as a judge, adjusted her glasses and spoke with the weight of someone who'd seen decades of conflict come and go, but never one quite like this. "We've reviewed the submitted documentation, the testimonies offered, and the conduct displayed by the involved parties," she said, voice calm but resonant. "We affirm Dolores Morris's character, contributions, and continued place in the life of her grandson and this community." The motion passed without dissent. Pastor Helen signed the resolution. I watched the strokes of her pen mark the official line. Standing member in good and active relationship. Unfounded allegations dismissed. Participation rights restored. Then came the part one hadn't expected. Brianna was barred, formally and unanimously, from all children's programming, including Tyler's Sunday school, choir rehearsals, and seasonal pageants until further notice. Not in punishment, but in protection. For the child's stability, Sister May clarified, and for the dignity of this space. The phrase sank into the air like a hymn. For the dignity of this space. As Monique filed the final paper into her case, she leaned close. "Now, it's not just your word. It's record." I nodded, gripping the binder in my lap. Inside was everything. The screenshots, the letter, the financial breakdowns, the redacted contact forms. Receipts, yes, but not vengeance. Just the truth, recorded, ratified. After the meeting, parents I didn't know well came up to shake my hand. Deacon Harold offered to help digitize the rest of the document. Sister Vaughn gave me a long, appraising look before she said, You are family here. Don't let anybody edit that out. Outside, the wind had picked up. October in Alabama always brought that final sharp gust before the real cold set in. I stood on the front steps for a moment and let it pass through me. 2 days later, I changed the locks. Harry's locksmith arrived at 10:12 a.m. The technician, young, polite, and not overly curious, worked fast. He removed the old brass knobs and installed a sleek satin nickel set with reinforced deadbolts. He handed me a new key wrapped in branded plastic and the receipt, $143 even. I paid in cash, no paper trail tied to anyone else. As the front door clicked shut under my own new key, I felt something settle behind my ribs. Not revenge, not closure, just control. Tyler came by that afternoon. Cynthia brought him, no fuss, no drama, just a short visit with a lunchbox and a quiet smile. "He's been asking to come," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Didn't want to make it complicated. He didn't come in with bags. There was no script, no performance, just, "Hi, Grandma," and a hug so tight it reset my breathing. We sat on the porch. He kicked his shoes off and started showing me a little paper craft he'd made, an uneven heart shape with a string looped through it. "I made it at school," he said. "It's for your new key." The keychain was red construction paper, laminated with packing tape, a smudge of glitter in one corner. It read, "GMA's place," in uneven letters. I slid it onto my ring without saying a word. We made grilled cheese for lunch. I let him pick the cartoon. He fell asleep on the couch, hands still curled around the hem of my sleeve. When Cynthia came back, I handed her the backup key. "Keep this for emergencies," I said. "But only you," she nodded. I already figured. We stood together at the window, watching Tyler sleep. The light touched his curls like blessing. "I don't know what happens next," I said. "You don't need to," she replied. "You did what you needed to." Later, after they left, I brewed a pot of sweet tea. Cynthia had left lemon wedges in the fridge and a new tin of cookies on the counter. The house felt different, not restored, reclaimed. At dusk, I locked the new door, turned off every light, and stood in the stillness of my kitchen. Binder filed. Locks changed. Key on my ring. Child still laughing in my hall. They stopped calling. They haven't replied since the hearing. But I'm still here.